And it is recording, so Rhonda will be happy. People are coming online. I can see that.
And do you do a Q&A afterwards for like the audience to engage too?
Yeah, I'm going to talk to them about the Q&A, and then I may interrupt you a couple times if it's a pertinent question on that item, or we may save them to the end.
That's great.
We've been getting a lot of questions, so
awesome.
Been going pretty good. Hi, everybody. We're going to just wait a few more minutes before we start with Sam. Let some other people get online. I see people clicking on as we go. So, and my clock on my computer might be a little fast. So we're going to wait just a few minutes. The young guy on the left is Dr. Sam Snyder. The good-looking guy on the right is Dave Peterson. So. And I've, Sam, I don't know about you, I've got my hair pulled back as far as it can because I've got a haircut pretty similar to what I was wearing in the 60s.
Yeah, right. Well, luckily I don't have any hair, so, it works out.
Well, one more minute, we're going to get going. Well, let's get started. Want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Want to welcome you to another one of Fly Fishers International's online Zooms. I'm Dave Peterson, and I'm chair of FFI's Conservation Committee. Tonight's webinar is the fifth in a series of conservation webinars. We're hosting these meetings with conservation leaders from across the United States to illustrate the challenges that our fisheries face and what hopefully can be done about some of those challenges. This webinar is presented and made possible only with the support of over 12,000 FFI members. 1 minute of housekeeping. As we go through the presentation with Dr. Snyder, you can click on the Q&A on your screen and submit questions. I'll be able to see those questions and we'll respond to them later in the webinar at an appropriate time. Time permitting, we'll try to make sure that everybody's questions get answered. Tonight, we're really pleased to have as our guest Dr. Sam Snyder to talk about the preservation of Bristol Bay in Alaska. As all of you know, Bristol Bay is probably the conservation hotspot across America that we hear most about. We've got one of the premier experts on the issue with us tonight, and we appreciate him joining. Sam is the senior campaign manager for the Alaska program with the Wild Salmon Center in Anchorage, Alaska. Welcome, Sam, and thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Always happy to talk Pebble. I feel like we've been talking about it a long time, but here we still are. So
exactly. Well, let's jump into tonight's topic. First, I think we'd all like to hear how you got involved with Pebble and got so invested in salmon and trout conservation. What's the history of your career?
Well, it's sort of long and strange, but I think, like all of us, we come to the conservation conversation because of fishing. I grew up actually in West Texas, so very far from Alaska, but grew up spending a lot of time in northern New Mexico and Colorado with family fishing. And, I think really like I came to this initially by, chasing small Rio Grande cutthroat trout in northern New Mexico with a small rod. But having conversations with my dad, it's actually his birthday today, and happy Father's Day to the dads out there. But having conversations with him about why these places are important. You spend a lot of time driving in the car, as we all do, right? We drive a lot of time driving and traveling to fish, to be alone with friends and family on waters. And I think over time, I just started like asking different questions about how our fisheries were changing, why fish weren't in certain places, as we learned about things like climate change, putting those things together. And really, you know, got into conservation because of fishing, long story short. How I got into this as a career was, I mean, to some degree, I think luck. Like a lot of school, I had the opportunity. I have a really very interdisciplinary doctoral degree in environmental studies. Wrote more about the culture and the history of fly fishing, but really asking the questions of like, what moves people to take care of places. And I was really fascinated by the history of fly fishing and contemporary anglers, like what makes us get on Zoom calls to listen to this stuff, or what makes us go out on weekends and roll boulders to restore a stream, whether it's in Michigan or it's New Mexico or Colorado or up here in Alaska. Like, what drives us to take care of these places? Well, it's that fishing is this really unique activity, and fly fishing is this really like even more unique. It's for some it's religious, for some it's spiritual, for some but it's deeply cultural and it's deeply meaningful. And so there's this connection that we have to the places where we walk in the water and we watch the bugs and we catch the fish and we care about them when we put that care into action. And so I was really fascinated from a sociological standpoint of, you know, why we do these things, how we work together to protect places. And so really, I mean, I sort of entered it first as an academic with like just looking at asking different questions. But then when my wife and I finished grad school, we said whoever got the first best job won. And this was right about the time that Red Gold came out. It's still, I think, that one of the best films that we've ever had about Bristol Bay. I was showing it. I was actually teaching in Michigan at Kalamazoo College. And I was teaching an environmental ethics class, and I showed it in my class. And this was 2008, 2009, and because 2007, 2008. And my wife was like, "Hey, I just got a job offer to go teach at the University of Alaska, Anchorage." And I mean, to me, that was a no-brainer, right? Like, I mean, no offense to Michigan. Michigan was great, and Kalamazoo was a super cool town. And I really enjoyed fishing the rivers of Michigan, but to move to Alaska was a no-brainer. And I literally, like, I watched Red Gold, and I wrote down the names of the people in the film, and I started calling them. And I was like, "Hey, I'm coming to Alaska. I work in fisheries conservation. I can write grants. I can do things." And I just kind of became a pest to start out. And then people are like, "Okay, let's give this guy a side project." And then before you knew it, I guess I proved myself relatively competent. And yeah, I've largely been working on helping manage and oversee sort of the day-to-day operations of the Pebble campaign for the past 10 years. I did a brief detour and ran the campaign against the Susitna-Watana Dam, which was is a proposal for a large hydropower project on the Susitna River in South Central Alaska. We got that stopped, and then I shifted back to Pebble. But I worked for Trout Unlimited for a while, and then now I work for the Wild Salmon Center. So we're based in Portland, but we have 2 staff in Alaska. So yeah, it's you know, I've been working on Pebble for 10 years and thinking about it and talking about it for 14, 15 years. It's been on our radar at least, you know, in a national sense. Obviously Alaskans have been dealing with it longer. So
cool. That's a great story, Sam. Thanks. Well, it's a great segue to my next question. As I mentioned earlier, Bristol Bay is one of the most talked about conservation hotspots in the world, Sam. What makes Bristol Bay so special and unique?
Well, I mean, I wish I could like do a show of hands. Who's been to Bristol Bay? I mean, it's the place that we dream about, right? I'm actually just going to go, while I'm talking, I'm going to try and go to my screen just because the fish.
Coming up. There you go.
There we go. Let's see here. I don't think you want to see my whole. Sorry. All right, can you see that? There we go. So those that don't know, I'm sure everybody knows where Bristol Bay is, but those that don't know, so I'm right here sitting in Anchorage. Bristol Bay is in this map down here in this circle. Now Bristol Bay is a massive area. It's, you know, the size of West Virginia. roughly. But it is the, it is the world's greatest sockeye salmon fishery. 2 years ago, 63 million sockeye returned to Bristol Bay. If you eat salmon, if you buy wild salmon in a grocery store, in their wild sockeye, the odds are probably that they're from Bristol Bay. Why do we care about salmon? Well, because we want to catch care about Bristol Bay because we want to catch these guys, these giant fish right here. The trout of Bristol Bay they're huge, but there's big fish everywhere. But the trout of Bristol Bay they're crazy unique. They're really big. They're really strong. They hit like freight trains. And to be in a place like Bristol Bay, there's no development. There's no roads. You have to fly everywhere. It's a really special opportunity. But these fish also fuel an economy of 14,000 commercial fishing jobs a year, $1.5 billion a year of economic activity. That's not just fishermen. That's not just the sale of fish. That's the boat builders. That's the people that's the pilots, all the way down to the processors of the fish, to the people that are selling fish in New York City in a restaurant. Like, it is a massive economic engine. It feeds Alaska. They feed the world. And so it's really critical in that regard. But to have, fish like this, I feel fortunate to be able to fill my freezer with them and also learn from, the people who have been living off these fish for generations. I think first and foremost, and maybe I should have started with this, but why do I care about Bristol Bay? Because these fish have not only fueled an ecosystem for forever, fueled an economy for a long time, but these have supported indigenous peoples for generations, thousands of years. This is their land. This is their home. They are the moral high ground for why we do this. Yes, it's great to go fish there. It's a really wild experience and it's really special, but ultimately this is about a people and a place and their ties to the land. And so they're at the front of what we do. And they're key partners in all of the work that we do. So there are many reasons why we do the work we do. But it also, comes down to that fish and what that fish means to us as communities, as cultures, as fishermen, Alaska Native partners, and economically.
Very cool. Very cool. So next step, I think, is to tell us a little bit about the Pebble Mine and why it's so potentially problematic for a place pristine place like Bristol Bay.
Yeah, and actually, I forgot I had that in my as a question, and I don't have any. I didn't put together any slides about Pebble, but I can tell you really quickly. I can rattle this stuff off. So Pebble, and you'd probably rather look at a picture of a beautiful fish and a beer. Pebble is a Canadian-owned company. They're owned by Northern Dynasty Minerals out of Vancouver, BC. Pebble is not a mine for pebbles, as you all know, but some people still ask that question. It's a copper and gold mine. It's one of I think it's the third largest undeveloped copper deposit in the world and one of the top 5 undeveloped gold deposits in the world. One of the big problems with Pebble is its size. First is it's a really low grade ore. Less than 1% of what you dig up out of the ground is usable minerals. So to make it profitable, you have to go really big. So Pebble estimates that at full build out or close to full build out, you're talking 10 to 12 billion tons of ore body. Only about 1% of that is usable minerals. So the rest is waste that you have to store on site forever. Another big issue is the location. So we can go back to this map and it's just a quick snapshot behind that map, but there's no roads here. There's no infrastructure. There are villages that are connected by river. But really the thing that has kept Bristol Bay so special is the fact that there's no roads, there's no dams, the development is minimal. And that allows the river systems to function as they have historically, ecologically over time. As soon as you start building an infrastructure, then you start impacting the fishery. So the location is really critical. And it's also one of the big issues is that the Pebble deposit sits at the top of the watershed. It's at the headwaters of the 2 largest salmon producers on the planet. the Kvichak and the Nushagak system. The Kvichak is the single largest producer of sockeye salmon on the planet. The Nushagak is one of the largest producers of king salmon on the planet. And so the location is rich, it's diverse, it's untouched, and it is really the nursing grounds for these massive salmon producing river systems. So we have the size of it, we have the location of it, and we have the type. And the type of the mine is really important. One, like I said, it's a low grade ore body for copper and gold. Two, a lot of what you dig up out of that is actually sulfur. And when you, Rick Halford, former Alaska president of the state Senate, longtime Republican voice in Alaska, and really strong opponent of Pebble, always says that really this is a sulfur mine. And what you have is you have to extract the metals in the mineral, you have to pull, there's several different processes they'll go through, but basically you wind up with a bunch of ground up sulfur on premises. You have to store that in perpetuity. Ground up sulfur plus water plus oxygen, it's basic high school chemistry, you get sulfuric acid. You're gonna have to manage this stuff forever. You're gonna have to manage tens of billions of gallons of water a year. You're gonna have to clean it, you're gonna have to treat it, you're gonna have to put it back into the river system. And this is a really wet region. So the type of mine that it is a copper and gold mine. It's has a real sort of strong sulfur base behind it. And then again, it's a low grade ore body. This would be a very different conversation, potentially more frightening if it was a high grade ore. But there's no way to, one of the things I'll talk about in a minute is, but Pebble is telling a story that they're gonna build a small mine, but it's not profitable to build a small mine. You either build this thing massive or you don't build it at all. It's not economically viable. And so in that regard, that's what makes it particularly dangerous. So Pebble is one of the largest copper and gold deposits on the planet. And it is situated squarely in the headwaters of the largest sockeye salmon producer on the planet.
Sam, this is a little follow-up.
Sure.
Are they proposing to store the tailings in the same way that we've seen throughout the West and other places where those tailing containments basically fail after a while? I mean, they haven't improved that technology much, have they?
No, and that's one of the hard things as you talk about, they say, well, the mining technology has improved. Well, again, this is the location. Like, you can't ship this stuff off site. You're not going to put it on a boat and take it somewhere else because A, nobody's going to want it, but B, it wouldn't be economically viable. So you're going to have tailings dams impoundments that are, miles long, 740 feet tall, holding back this waste over time. Now they say eventually they'd put it back in the pit, but again, this is wet. These are deep pits. You have a very low water table. So again, you start running into the same questions that as you say, we've seen these things fail. We know the Mount Poly mine from, was that 2014 that failed, in the Fraser River system. That tailings dam system was designed by a company called Knight Peasold. They have also done a lot of the work on behalf of Pebble. They say they've altered the design so as to avoid tailings dams failures, but we're human. The things we build are fallible. And there is no guarantee that this won't fail on some course of time. It might not be next year. It might not be 10 years from construction. It might not be 100 years, but it's gonna fail at some point, and somebody's gotta be responsible for that. And I think the ultimate question is what is the risk we're willing to take for a place as intact and functioning and special as a place like Bristol Bay? We don't have these places anymore, so.
We got a pertinent question at this point, Sam.
Sure.
It's from Mark Rockwell in Southern California, but he's president of our Northern California Council. Is Northern Dynasty lying about the size of the mine, or are they hiding and wording in a description?
That's a great question. And actually, I don't have that slide here. I really should pull up a different slideshow for you. But anyways, they're right now they're lying. So they're telling us that they're going to build. Well, it depends on who they're talking to. Let me tell you that. If they are talking to the Alaskan public, if they're talking to EPA and Army Corps, they have pitched a mine that is about a 20-year mine plan. It's about a third of the size of full build out. So they're talking to like 2.7 billion tons. So maybe actually a quarter of full build out. So that's what they're telling to Alaskans. They're saying, we listen to you, we're gonna build a small mine, it's environmentally sensitive. But what they're doing is they're just trying to get their permits, and then they expand. They're telling shareholders, potential investors, so they tell Alaska 20 years, and then Ron Thiessen, the CEO of Northern Dynasty Minerals, goes to Denver Gold Investment Conference, and he says, well, actually, we've got generations of mining here. This is one of the greatest deposits in the history of mining. We're going to be mining this thing for decades. Those are two different stories right there. We're talking, generations versus 20 years. And yeah, there's 100 years of potential mining here. There's also 100 years of potential failure. So there's two different stories. They haven't been totally straight. They also haven't released any financial feasibility reports that show the economic sort of growth of the project over time. There are some that have said that this mine is not financially feasible at 20 years. At anything, it's like a $3 billion net loss. So yeah, so they're lying. I guess the short answer is yes, they're lying. They're trying to hide the ball.
Okay, I got another question for you that pertains to the threat to Bristol Bay. It's a question from Mike Clancy. He says, could you talk about the 100-mile road from the mine to Cook Inlet?
Definitely. So this is a really wild question, because I actually I just changed this picture while you were doing the introduction. So I don't know if you can see my cursor here.
Yeah.
This is the mine site right here, kind of over here. Anchorage is would be like right up here. This is Kenai, the famed Kenai River. Until like 2.5, 3 weeks ago, their plan was actually to have a road come down straight down here. They were going to put the mineral. This was a bananas plan, and they were proposing an ice-breaking boat. There was going to be a port here, and there was going to be a port here, and then there was going to be a port here. And so they were going to drive and pipe the minerals and ore body to here, boat it across Lake Iliamna, which is the second largest freshwater lake on the planet, I think. And it has one of 2 populations of freshwater seals in the world. So they're going to drive it across Lake Iliamna and then put it back on trucks and pipes and ship it to the Cook Inlet, to a port in Cook Inlet, and then they were gonna boat it out. Now, so 2 weeks ago they changed their plan, and they've gone for their northern corridor route. And so this is 100 plus, I think it's a 118-mile road, in which they're going to follow the curve of Lake Iliamna. There's already a road here that goes from Pedro Bay right here to the port. One, because there's a diamond core or a rock quarry there. It's called Diamond Point. Also, this is a pretty common place for commercial fishermen to bring their boats in, and then there's a truck that hauls them across, and then they drive them down Lake Iliamna to get them into Bristol Bay. So there is some road infrastructure here. One of the big problems here is that this new road corridor crosses some like 50 different streams that they haven't studied as closely. But all of these, like all of the salmon of the Kvichak, come up here and spawn in the northern end of Lake Iliamna and all these little tributaries. And so this is a particularly dangerous area because they're going to be crossing a lot more salmon habitat, crossing a lot more roads. So from a salmon perspective, maybe crossing Lake Iliamna was a better idea, but from an infrastructure standpoint, it was bananas. And so many points of failure. To think that you're going to put that stuff on a boat, an unproven ice-breaking barge, is just insanity. And then the port they were going to use was one of the windiest and sort of more treacherous ports. Actually, it's not a port; it's just a bay. So they've changed that plan, and now we have them sort of coming up here to Diamond Point. One of the real questions here, though, is there's also land that they don't have access to. And that's maybe Native Corporation land, for example. Bristol Bay Native Corporation is staunchly against the mine, and they've said that they're not going to grant access to Pebble to cross their land. So we have yet to see how that impacts the permitting process. Pebble feels pretty convinced that it would be fine. And then other infrastructure issues. There's pipelines that would be running natural gas here from Anchor Point across, and then piping the natural gas over They reckon they'll need like 350 megawatts of power a year to run the thing. That's that's Anchorage power. So talking about drawing from Cook Inlet natural gas to power this project as well.
Amazing, amazing. I got a couple of questions on the politics of it, but it might tie in better with the next topic we're going to talk about. This fight's been going on for a long time, and between 2010 and 2014, you and the other advocates on this issue came really close to stopping the mine. What happened?
Yeah, I mean, we're so close, so close. So I think, you know, when I wandered in, just as a little sort of personal bit to it, I came into the game around 2008, 2009, and there were a lot of I just noticed a typo on here. But anyways, there were a lot of sort of head scratching. So Pebble is on state land. I think is really important to note. So most of the permits are under state jurisdiction. But there's a couple of federal permits, the Clean Water Act being the big one, because these are waters of the United States. But there was a lot of sort of head scratching about like, what's the best way to do this? We get a lot of questions about, can't we just have a vote about it? And it has been a part of elections, but you can't have a statewide ballot measure that targets one specific area. It's against Alaska Constitution. So we can't just say, hey, Alaskans, let's vote up or down on Pebble. It doesn't work that way legally, unfortunately. In 2010, 14 tribes wrote to EPA and said, hey, EPA, you have this really, you have the authority under the Clean Water Act to basically review, restrict, or deny a permit for anything that will, cause unacceptable adverse impacts to waters of the United States, being, fisheries areas, recreational areas, shellfish beds, matters of human health. EPA hardly ever uses this authority. They've used it 13 times in the history of the Clean Water Act, because typically this permit is managed by the Army Corps of Engineers, who is overseeing it right now. The EPA at the time was like, well, this is a pretty big area and it's really important and this is a really big issue. So we're going to take our time on this. And what they did is they spent between 2010 and 2014, they basically wrote, the best way I describe it is they wrote the greatest book report ever written on salmon habitat, impacts of mining on salmon habitat, and putting that all together for a potential analysis of impacts on Pebble. They used existing plans that Pebble had on file with the state, and they used a financial feasibility report from 2011 that gave us a pretty clear sense of what Pebble would look like. And to be fair, Pebble hasn't drifted very much from that original vision, even though they say that plan was not their plan. But Pebble, so EPA basically came up with it. They did two drafts of this, plus, and then the final. They had community meetings, they had peer review meetings, they had more than three rounds of public comment, in which the public commented and said, a million, almost 1.2 million Americans wrote in and said, hey, we want you to protect Bristol Bay. And basically what they came to the conclusion was that even a small mine, a mine that would impact 11 miles of stream, 1,000 acres of wetlands, and alter the stream flow of the water by like 20% average daily flow, would have unacceptable adverse impacts on Bristol Bay. Like, you can't do it. So that's a pretty small project too, considering. And that at that one, it was like slightly less than 1 billion tons a year, or 1 billion tons of total build out. So very small version of Pebble, non-economically viable version of Pebble. Still, they said it would have unacceptable adverse impacts on Pebble, or on Bristol Bay, sorry. And in 2014, they came out with a proposed determination. And basically they said, like, these are the rules. You can't have a mine that impacts 11 miles or more of salmon habitat. That you can't have a mine that impacts X acreage of wetlands and streams, or wetlands and lakes. And said, if you can get in under that, you can apply for a permit. But if you can't, then we're not going to even give you a permit. And so Pebble sued and said, you're preemptively vetoing our project. You can't do that. To be fair, EPA has, and it's been defended in court, EPA has the authority to act on the Clean Water Act whenever, before, during, or after a permit is applied for. So they were doing something totally unique and rare by acting before it, but they did so. Pebble sued, and basically locked this thing up from 2016 on. Hang on, I'm going to shut my window because my neighbor's mowing his lawn. You know, it's just 4 o'clock here. It's lawn mowing time. So anyway, so Pebble sued EPA and locked this thing up in court. This also brought, so 2016, not to make this political, but these are politics. And the administration we have now has a very decidedly different approach to environmental protection, a very different EPA. And so the new EPA administrator comes in, and really what you see is Pebble doubling down on lawyers and lobbyists in DC. They keep pushing to have EPA's work overturned and withdrawn. Eventually they did. And you know, the current EPA administrator, Wheeler, used to be a lobbyist for Pebble. So there's they're utilizing the connections they have to the current political administration. Everybody does it, but they're certainly working it to their advantage. And so what we have now, in 2017, Pebble submitted their permit application, their Clean Water Act permit application, which kickstarted the process. So I don't know, I'll pause there, see if there's any questions, because I just blew through like 6 years of history.
Well, this is a question that might have you expand, and I think you answered it, but I want to ask it for Mark. And you talked about how the Obama administration determined the mine would be too destructive and too damaging, and I think you've answered the question. How did their evaluation get overrun by the Trump administration?
The Trump gang.
And it's the change in the EPA, correct? I mean,
yeah. So so they settled the lawsuit and agreed that EPA would back off the proposed determination and back up, and that was pulled and withdrawn. So clearing the path for Pebble to move forward with their permit application. What's really fascinating is you actually have a lot of the staff that worked for EPA, the career staff, God bless them. They were there. They've been there some of them have been there for multiple presidential administrations, well beyond the Obama administration. And, they put a lot of work into studying this. So even if you look at EPA's comments on Pebble's environmental impact statements, the stuff the staff are writing is damning. They're like, this is terrible. Like, Pebble hasn't answered questions. This is insufficient. Other agencies also, Department of Interior, like, this is so flawed, it precludes any meaningful analysis of impacts of Pebble on Bristol Bay. But yet we move forward because it's not the scientists that make the decisions, it's the political leadership. And there's no, and that basically the political capital here is overwhelming the scientific evidence. Between Pebble, there's a close relationship also with our governor, with Governor Dunleavy. There are email transcripts where Pebble is ghostwriting letters from Governor Dunleavy to the Trump administration. Dunleavy is meeting with the Trump administration, and days later, Army Corps or EPA leadership in particular are coming out with decisions to roll back the work of the Obama administration, EPA. So the people on the ground, the scientific staff and the agencies are still doing really fabulous work. It's not filtering to the top, and it's not driving the decision making because of the political games at play. And I think that's what's really frustrating is and they made the same arguments against us, but we had peer-reviewed science on our side. And now the political decisions that are being made about Pebble belie mountains and mountains of scientific evidence that we know about salmon, about what makes them thrive in ecosystems and what makes them sensitive to degradation. And so you can really see the shift there. It's become a politically driven process rather than a scientifically driven process.
Well, what kind of options have we got moving forward? Are there state approaches to stopping Pebble?
Um,
What can, what can the guy on the street do who wants to fly fish or even
yeah,
protect the conservation? What can they do?
yeah. I mean, I think, one of the things, so I mean, from an Alaskan standpoint, she's not up for re-election this time around, but Senator Murkowski remains one of the greatest sort of chess pieces of this game. For a long time, she situated herself fairly squarely and like let the process play out. And last year, we started to see her shift on a number of things, but certainly when it came to Pebble, she started to listen to the scientific staff in those agencies and say, you know what, maybe this EIS, this environmental impact statement, is not what it's supposed to be. Maybe the NEPA process is not working the way that it's supposed to work. So she said last year that it had become clear that there were gaps and deficiencies in Pebble's permit. She actually, in the budget, the 2019 budget, she wrote in language that didn't force, but it encouraged the agencies to use all of their authority, including Clean Water Act authority, to step in and overrule permit decisions. We are anticipating the final environmental impact statement from Pebble literally any day now. My guess is they'll release it on Friday, July 3rd at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, because that's how they like to roll, right before a long weekend. And it really could be as soon as tomorrow. It could be Monday. And I think, but a lot of folks are thinking the first week of July, we're going to see the final environmental impact statement for Pebble. What happens then is that there's about 30 to 60 days in which the Army Corps finalizes the actual permit. They come to a decision and grant the permit for the Clean Water Act. This is the time again for EPA to act. So EPA got a lot of flack from 2010 to 2014 from Pebble because they acted outside the normal scope of operation. There wasn't a permit on the table yet. Well, now there's a permit on the table. Now is the time for EPA to act. And most all of EPA's written commentary on the permit process underscores that they should use their Clean Water Act authority to stop this project. They're not going to do it unless Senator Murkowski at least shows support there. And so last year, she really created a foundation for potentially supporting EPA action. From an Alaska standpoint, you can bet that we are working and talking to everybody that, from our grassroots, from sort of the everyday Alaskans calling her. I mean, I think last week alone, we mobilized like 1,000 emails into her office, for example. We have a really good grassroots sort of side of our campaign. And then leadership, people who own businesses, run businesses, own lodges that have good relationships with her, leaning on them. I think also, depending on where you are, I mean, the Pacific Northwest delegation has been really important. Senator Cantwell has been a really critical voice in standing up for Washington jobs, making sure that our Congress people are hearing, because if an agency like EPA is going to actually step in, they're going to need congressional support to do so. Then there's lawsuits. There's a very good chance that this thing, if the permit is issued, our lawyers are ready. They will sue. They will lock this up in court. And then, whatever happens with the election will be really big. If we have another 4 years of this current administration, then I would expect that this project they'll start building in the next 4 years. If we have a change in presidential administration, I would anticipate that there are some in the new administration that were part of the Obama administration, and they have a familiarity with this issue. Agency folks in EPA, they're all watching this and they know what's going on. I mean, I think one of the great things is partly because of the power of the sportsman's community. We were able to elevate this as a top tier conservation issue, bipartisan conservation issue. Between 2010 and 2014, we've been able to maintain it in that space. And so, leveraging that for the right political moment is going to be pretty important to greenlight these agencies to step in and stop a broken process.
So is it fair to say the bottom line on this, Sam, is vote?
Yeah, I mean, I think vote, and in the short, yeah, definitely vote. I think in the short term, it doesn't matter where you are. I think it's important that your Congress people, your elected officials hear from you about this, regardless of where they sit politically. it is important that everybody knows about this issue. Because they're on committees, that there could be language in a budget. They might sit on a budget committee or appropriations committee, and if Senator, or if say Congressman Huffman from California wants to introduce, so last year Congressman Huffman from California also introduced language in the appropriations process that said no money could be spent finalizing the Pebble permit from that budget. Now the language was softened once Murkowski got her hands on it, but I think, if your elected official sits on that committee with Huffman and says, well, I don't know anything about this Pebble process and I haven't heard about it, well, it's important that all of our elected officials are hearing about this, because they sit on committees that make the decisions, that fund the agencies that ultimately are making the decisions here. And so I think that's really important. So voting, yes, is absolutely important. I won't tell you how to vote, but I think regardless of how you vote, making sure that your Congress people understand that this is a critical issue. It's a bipartisan issue. This is not just some, and I think that's one of the things that fascinates me and draws me to it. This is not some like classic greeny liberal issue. This is the ultimate, it's an economic engine. It is a space for sportsmen, a space of dreams for sportsmen, and it's Alaska Native history. So it is such a wild and unique coalition that I think really tells a different story than some of the other sort of classic conservation battles of in American history.
For sure. Sure. Sam, we've been talking for almost 45 minutes, but we can't leave a webinar with Fly Fishers International without talking about the fishing. Tell us about the fishing you do, and this is the part where you get to make the rest of us who can't get up there feel envious.
Yeah, I mean, I will go back. This is not me, but look, I guess one of the bonuses of this work is being able to get to go to places like Bristol Bay. Like I work in the nonprofit world, and my wife is a university professor. We're not rolling in it, so the chances to get to Bristol Bay are slim. But I get to go for work, and that's a pretty cherished opportunity. But Alaska is a wild and unique place, and we have the Kenai River. We're driving potentially this weekend. We're going to load the family up in the van, and we're going to go up north, and we're going to go catch grayling for the weekend. I think the thing that drew me to Alaska were the rivers, and to be able to be here and have access to these fish that just hit like a freight train is pretty special. I'm not gonna lie to you though, like, and you guys, everybody's watching and be like, yeah, whatever, this guy. But it's weird fishing up here. It's big streamers. It's egg patterns. And sometimes I really miss sort of the simplicity of, a hopper dropper combo in Colorado on a small stream with a 4-weight rod. There's just there's something about that, the seeing of the fish rise. I think that's always will be what I love most. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that, I'm not very good with a spey rod. I'm passable at best. But when you nail that cast and it just happens to you just feel it. And then all of a sudden that fish hits like a freight train and it all comes together. I don't think there's anything more special than that. It's a really crazy experience, and to do it in places like Bristol Bay, like the Kenai, are awesome. I will say though that just one last thing, like we have a whole bunch of streams through Anchorage, and they're just urban streams that are full of tiny trout. But I have a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, and we have taken to going out just in the afternoons after work for like an hour, and catching small trout on a smaller rod again with a little streamer, and man, it's pretty cool. And I'm pretty excited about my kids, being big enough to row my drift boat on the Kenai so that I can just fish.
There you go.
This is my dream. I'm really looking forward to it. So.
Well, I suspect you're going to get them on some grayling this weekend, because
it's going to be fun.
They're not the smartest fish in the sea.
No, they're not, and it's perfect for kids of that size, right? You just use a little streamer, a little dry fly, and I think they're going to have a hoot. It's going to be great.
Well, Sam, we want to thank you very much for tonight. We hope the audience will help spread the word on your work and on the work of FFI to protect all fish in all waters. For those of them watching these webinars, we're going to be taking a break for the summer and picking up the series in the fall. If you're not a member of FFI, please consider joining us. We've got 12,000 members supporting our work, and we need more because our resources are limited, and we need more resources to support conservation issues like the one that Sam has described for us tonight. So, Sam,
Yeah.
again, thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Hang on, like doing multiple things at once. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. Anyways, sorry. I was just gonna say, Dave, feel free to share my email with people.
Okay.
I can be found at the Wild Salmon Center. I really appreciate the conversation and the opportunity to talk with you all. It was, because we did it was more conversational. I glossed over some things, lots of things. So if you want to talk more deeply about how you can be involved or what to do, feel free to reach out to me. Defend Bristol Bay is one of our websites. It's sort of a coalition site. And then we're launching a new website called Stop Pebble Mine Now in the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for that. I'll send that link to you, Dave, so you can share it out with folks. We'll have really up to the minute updates on the permitting process, what you can do from what part of the country you're at. And then a couple of the organizations we work with, United Tribes of Bristol Bay. Again, I work for the Wild Salmon Center. Salmon State, Alaska, we work with Trout Unlimited. There's a whole laundry list of groups, but yeah, support the organizations. And if you haven't seen Red Gold, it's 10 years old now. Still watch it. It's available on Vimeo. It's still one of the greatest films about Bristol Bay and this fight out there. So I encourage you to watch it when we're still locked down, sort of.
We'll do it, Sam. We'll do it. Thanks again.
Thanks,
Appreciate
everybody.
it. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you again in the fall. Enjoy the summer and stay safe, please.
Awesome.
Thanks, Sam.